Despite the fantastical title, this is not an episode about an upcoming Harry Potter or other fantasy-related book. It is, however, a peek inside the overlapping space between fantasy and reality. And it starts a really long time ago in ancient times and ancient lands with a group of very mysterious people known as alchemists. Yeah, I know. It seems like I'm wading into troubled waters here, but if you'll stick with me for just a few minutes, I think it'll all make sense. First, who were the alchemists? Were they these Harry Potter-esque magicians and sorcerers concocting elixirs and potions with access to secret knowledge? Or were they charlatans in fancy robes tricking gullible people into believing that they could bestow riches and immortality for the right price, of course? I'll be honest, I've never really cared or had any interest before now. Even though I'm a true lifelong geek, I've never read or watched anything Harry Potter. Not very geeky of me, huh? So when I recently decided to do a little exploratory research, I never expected to get sucked down a fascinating Alice-style rabbit hole that led to reading lots of old, thick, and sometimes confusing stuff. But I'll spare you some of those confusing details. Here's my simplistic conclusion. My guess is, in context, alchemists were nothing more than primitive scientists with inquisitive minds, a very firm belief in the supernatural, and a lust for gold. Let me explain what I mean and why I think that matters for me and you today. Alchemy was this ancient exploratory system that focused on metals. Alchemists were a mix of metallurgists, doctors, and philosophers, many of whom shared the common religious beliefs of their time and place in history, which is a very important point to remember, so let me say it one more time. They shared the common religious beliefs of their time and place in history. The very word alchemy is where the word chemistry comes from. So things that happen every day in high school science labs were also happening for alchemists, but certainly with less light, both figuratively and physically. And alchemists, despite their historical reputations, did things that actually led to important discoveries and inventions. For example, the work alchemists did led to what today we would recognize as a rudimentary periodic table. The work of alchemists eventually led to contributions in metalworking, the production of gunpowder, ink, dyes, paints, cosmetics, leather tanning, ceramics, glass manufacturing, preparation of extracts, and a whole lot more. So again, who were they? Well, Sir Isaac Newton, though he was best known for his study of gravity and the laws of motion, he also apparently wrote more than 1 million words of alchemical notes throughout his lifetime. Robert Boyle, known as the father of chemistry, was originally an alchemist. Swiss physician Paracelsus, famous today for that phrase, "the dose makes the poison," he was an alchemist. Johannes Gutenberg, the inventor of the printing press, was a metallurgist/alchemist. In 1912, former U.S. President Herbert Hoover, along with his wife Lou Henry Hoover, translated into English the once famous alchemy book, De Re Metallica. No, not the heavy metal band. It means concerning the nature of metals. So when we talk about alchemy, we're really throwing around this idea and practice spanning over 4 millennia and several continents. But it's the Western version of alchemists that we usually think of when we see and hear stories like those found in Harry Potter. In general, Western alchemy had 3 main goals. The first was figuring out ways to change base metals like lead into precious metals like gold. This, quote, transmutation process was called chrysopoeia, which I'll explain in just a minute. The second goal was the manufacture of this, quote unquote, elixir of life, which was supposedly able to stave off death as well as cure illness. The third and final goal was the creation of an alkahest, or a universal solvent, which they believed would be able to dissolve anything, even gold. So, make gold, make medicine, dissolve things. Got it. So how did they do what they did? When metallurgists would heat metal ore, obviously the ore itself would change color and different compounds would appear in the process. Now, we know now that these reactions are because of the impurities found in raw ore, but alchemists at the time thought it was evidence of the transformation of the material from one thing into another. To them, it all felt very mystical, very supernatural. Remember, they shared the religious beliefs of their time. And of course, chemical transmutation is a very real and natural phenomenon that we can easily observe in nature. Just think about butterflies as one example. So it's really no wonder that these alchemists were fascinated by this idea. And you know there had to be a first. That one inquisitive person experimenting and hypothesizing who said to himself, you know what, I really, really like gold. I wonder if there's a way to make my own. And so began a lifelong obsession fueled partly by greed, partly by wide-eyed wonder, and partly by a desire to be the one to crack open this super secret and priceless knowledge. So think about it. If you were working on a way to turn ordinary lead into extraordinary gold, would you want your knowledge, your pot of gold, your secret formula stolen? Of course not. So in order to protect their intellectual property, alchemists stored all of their notes in secret codes and creative analogies called dectamen. Think military codes or codes that were used in espionage, and you probably have the right idea. And it really worked. Even today, modern scholars are still unsure exactly of what alchemists were up to because they can't crack the codes. Over the ages, alchemy persisted because transmutation clearly produced something. The problem is that neither they nor we always know what it produced. They because they lacked our scientific knowledge, and we because of the whole secret code thing. I mentioned earlier that Western alchemy had three main goals: the chrysopoeia, the elixir of life, and a universal solvent. In alchemy, chrysopoeia, which is just a Greek word that means gold making, was always priority number one. And that's where the fantasy of Harry Potter overlaps with reality. The obsessive experimentation of alchemists eventually led to the belief of what became known as lapis philosophorum, which is Latin for philosopher's stone. Now, basically, this was a powerful, super secret additive, that's the key word, additive, that when heated together with other materials, it would transform the mixture into gold. When made into a powder, this additive could then be dissolved in a drink to become the so-called elixir of life. So you see why this was so important. It was sort of like the world's first superfood. I mean, really, really very superfood. Most alchemists were obsessed with discovering a way to create this philosopher's stone, and it's pretty easy to imagine why from a strictly material monetary perspective. They experimented with hundreds, probably thousands of combinations. One of Isaac Newton's 17th century manuscripts, buried in a private collection for decades, reveals his recipe for a material thought to be a step toward concocting this elusive, almost magical philosopher's stone additive. I say almost magical because, remember, we've left Harry Potter and crossed into contextual reality. Chrysopoeia was regarded as an almost miraculous process because the understanding remained hidden from alchemists, most of whom actually believed that it mirrored the process of Christian salvation. The transformation of lead into gold was presumed to mirror the purification of a sinner through God's grace. And when you stop to think about it, it's a pretty good analogy. I mean, can you fully, completely, and accurately describe the depths of how God changes those who believe? I sure can't. Of course, it's easy for us today to see things as parallels or as analogies, but we have a hard time seeing them as anything more. But that wasn't the case for people back then. They saw the physical and the spiritual as being two manifestations of the exact same truth or power. And few people seem to have been as fascinated by that as the famous psychologist Carl Jung. He wrote about it in Psychology and Alchemy, first published in 1944, and then again in the Mysterium Conjunctionis, his masterwork in 1955. In the latter, Jung argues that alchemy was not mainly concerned with turning lead into gold. Quote, "The symbolic gold of great worth," wrote Jung, or the transforming philosopher's stone, the lapis philosophorum, hunted for centuries by alchemists, is to be found in man. It is the heart which is transmuted into finest gold, end quote. I couldn't agree more. And here's why all of this geeky rabbit hole alchemistical adventure matters for you and me. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi once wrote, "Of all the virtues we can learn, no trait is more useful, more essential for survival, and more likely to improve the quality of life than the ability to transform adversity into an enjoyable challenge." Former Navy SEAL and Rhodes Scholar Eric Greitens says, "The benefits of struggling are so precious that if they could be bottled up, people would pay dearly for them." Does that sound familiar? The problem is that the benefits of struggle can't be bottled. And if you want the wisdom, the strength, the clarity, the courage that can come from struggle, the price is clear. You have to endure the struggle first. If you want to be happy, you need resilience. If you want to be successful, you need resilience. But you can't have happiness, success, or anything else worth having without meeting hardship along the way. It requires that we confront pain and hardship and fear. Greitens says that when people hear the word resilience, they often think of bouncing back. If you look up resilience in the dictionary, one of the first definitions you'll find is this capability of a strained body to recover its size and shape after deformation. That's called elastic resilience. And that's really a physics definition. As it applies to humans, it means recovery or bouncing back after stress. The assumption is that people are the same before and after hardship. The problem, says Greitens, is that most of life just isn't as black and white as Newtonian physics. Trying to treat human beings like variables in an equation leads to some bad thinking. If we limit our understanding of resilience to this idea of bouncing back, we miss much of what hardship and pain and suffering offer us. We also misunderstand our basic human capacity to change and improve. Life's reality is that we cannot bounce back. What's done cannot be undone. And some of what life does to us is harsh. As Greitens says, there is no bouncing back, there's only moving through. What happens to us becomes part of us. We do not bounce back from hard experiences. We find healthy ways to integrate those experiences into our lives. Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "This world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places." End quote. Qualifier there is many, but not all. Not all of us are strong at the broken places. To be strong at the broken places is to be resilient. Being broken by itself doesn't make us better. Hardship can create a helpless person or a heroic one. Some people are made stronger by suffering, others are defeated by it. What's the difference? What is the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone that transforms hardship into gold? It's resilience. Resilience is the magic additive that, when heated together with struggle, creates a victor instead of a victim. Once again, I'm reminded of James 1:2-4, which says, "Consider it a great joy whenever you experience various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. But endurance must do its complete work, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing." I don't know about you, but I've had my share of struggles in this life, and I'd sure like to get better at transforming that lead into spiritual, mental, and emotional gold. Resilience is the missing additive. Remember, a better mind always leads to a better life.